Thank you. So yes, I did my PhD in binge drinking. No, it wasn't as fun as it sounds, honestly. It kind of puts you off more than anything else. So hello, it's very nice to be here in person again at level 39. I am from Bournemouth University. Yep. I should mention we've got a little Bournemouth contingent here today. So we have 4 past and present PhD students and somebody from one of our undergraduate courses. Fair warning to guys, I will be using the same jokes as I use at Bournemouth. And I'm going to try and encourage you at the end of my talk to come and see us in Bournemouth. So I'm going to talk about some work in progress, and I'm saying that deliberately to try and manage expectations, because the work is nowhere near as developed or as interesting as all the talks so far today. So this is pilot study. This is what we say in academia when we haven't quite finished doing something. It's pilot research. I'm going to be talking about social engineering. I'm sure you're all familiar with social engineering and kind of what that looks like. I'm sure I don't need to explain it to you. And also phishing emails. Now, to be fair, when I first put this kind of talk together, or the abstract, it was about 2 years ago. Then, unfortunately, of course, Impact was cancelled because of the pandemic. So the research has moved on a little bit since then. So I will be deviating a little bit and going into some other topics as well. But just to kind of give you an idea of the kind of thing that we have been doing. So humans, as we know, are a factor in cybersecurity. They're often described as being the weakest link, which, okay, objectively in some ways that is a fairly factual and fair comment. But it's something I think probably people in this room would tend to agree is not also a very helpful way of thinking about things. If you kind of demonise the human element, it doesn't really help create that kind of security culture. But humans do not necessarily cause risk, but they are a facilitating factor. This chap, this is a picture of the Hawaii missile deterrent system. Now, you might remember a couple of years ago, there was a bit of a mistake. Someone pressed the wrong button, and everyone in Hawaii got a text message saying missiles are incoming, and it caused a bit of panic. People got a bit upset. To try and kind of reassure the public that this was a mistake and we were on top of things, we did various kind of press things, we did kind of a PR exercise. We had a picture of one of the employees, standing in front of the control system, showing how competent they are. Can anyone guess what the problem was with the photo when it was released to the world? There's a post-it note and there's a password on it. And this is the kind of thing where humans get blamed and get kind of demonised, and people from the more kind of technical backgrounds I know get very frustrated at humans for just being weird and doing stupid things and just doing these kind of things. One of the problems is that a lot of the things we ask people to do in cybersecurity are not things we've ever had a need to do before. So at no point in human evolution have we had to remember a password. That's not been a thing until fairly recently. And so if you do have a situation where people are expected to have complex passwords, this is going to happen. People are going to go down the path of least resistance. Well, one of my favourite studies involved getting psychology students to go out into the street and just stop people at random and ask them, so I say to them, we're doing a survey on security behaviour, and I would ask these random people what their password was. Now, what percentage do you think said what their password was to this random stranger in the street? 70. It was about 30%, but at least 70% would give a hint of it, even if they wouldn't say what it actually was. They also had a little experimental component, so some of the sample they gave chocolate to before they asked a question, and that increased the compliance to about 50%. And just out of curiosity, who do you think is more easily bribed by chocolate, men or women? It was men. Women, there was no significant effect whatsoever. Men, yeah, just giving the chocolate. So there's always things that humans do which are difficult, and we try to kind of understand why we do it, how to stop it. It's not just for the users, it is also designers. So this person's tried to create a security gate. What we've actually done is create a ladder that people can then climb over to get to our side. And I think sometimes, again, it's a bit unfair. We focus on the users and the things they do, but we have to remember that software systems come from humans who are equally flawed and equally kind of biased and do equally kind of strange things. So we try to look at everyone, try and look at the whole ecosystem of people who kind of are involved in designing cybersecurity, but also using cybersecurity as well. So one of the problems is we're trying to fight against evolution. We're trying to fight against things that people's brains are hardwired to do. So in psychology, there's the idea of a cognitive miser versus a naive scientist. So a cognitive miser approach is when you take very limited information and you come to a conclusion. So you have a very superficial surface thing, you come to a conclusion based on that information. Naive scientist, which I also think sounds really patronising, but naive scientist is a term where you think more carefully and deeply and you can process things and you try and think about it carefully. We use cognitive miser all the time. So if I ask you to guess, what flavour are those crisps? What do you think is the most likely flavour of crisps that's going to be? cheese and onion. It's actually cheesy beans on toast, which is lovely, isn't it? But the thing is, most of the time, it's okay to do that kind of thinking. So if you are running for a train and you're really hungry and you run to W. Smith at Waterloo and you want a packet of crisps, you think, okay, cheese and onion blue, you grab a blue packet. Most of the time, you're fine. Most of the time, you've made the right decision. But you might get on the train and you might realise, oh my God, I've actually got cheesy beans on toast. Now, those of us who are of a certain age in the room might remember cheese and onion crisps were not always blue. They used to be green. And to me, 25 years on, they still taste green. They will never taste blue. And I've never seen Walkers confirm this, but I suspect the reason why we changed the colours around was because they wanted to get people to think about it more. They want people not to have to pause and think about what flavour. That's a kind of fairly good marketing technique. So most of the time we use cognitive miser approach because the amount of information we have to process is just phenomenal. Even ChatGPT, as wonderful as it is, or maybe slightly questionable, even that cannot do what humans can do. The amount of things we process. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, so this isn't really my exact expertise, but I'm going to go on a limb and say that if we try to use naive scientists all the time, constantly, when we're conscious, I think our brains would actually explode. I think that's what actually will happen, because we just can't process that. So we use cognitive miser, we come to quick conclusions, and this is what social engineers do. They try to push you to making that quick decision. We try to kind of exploit you into not thinking carefully and deeply. We try to push you towards making those very quick, irrational decisions. That's one of the things where phishing emails can be especially successful, because the amount of emails we have to process in any average job is incredible. As has been mentioned today, we have organisational culture. There's an expectation of doing things very quickly. So Lola, one of our former PhD students, has been looking, as part of our PhD, looked at kind of organisational cybersecurity and pressures and why people do things which might seem to be a bit silly. And so this is why phishing emails can be one of the easiest routes for a social engineer. One of the problems, though, is if you ask someone, why did you click on a phishing email, they're going to say, well, I didn't realise, or I don't know. They're not really going to tell you why particularly. And this is difficult. This is one of the things about human behaviour. Humans are not very good at explaining why they've done things a lot of the time. So you have to try and find a way of looking kind of under the bonnet. How can you kind of try to get into what's actually happening? One of the things we've been doing is looking at eye tracking as a way of doing that. So you get different things from eye tracking. You get things like fixation, duration, so how long your eyes are stationary, saccade length, how much time your eye spends moving, number of regressions, how many times you go back to previous fixated point. And it's worth stressing, the way that humans read is really weird. So in your mind, you might think to yourself, you've just read that sentence by sentence, bullet point by bullet point. You probably haven't. You probably started with the second one. You probably got halfway through that sentence, went back to the first word. You probably went up and down and round about. People do not read in a kind of smooth, linear way. They read in very strange, erratic ways. And one of the problems when you're trying to apply this research to cybersecurity is a lot of the kind of eye tracking research is based on innocent examples of reading. It's based on novels or newspapers or magazine articles. It's not based on phishing emails where the author of the writing is trying to trick you or trying to make you do something impulsive. So we're kind of curious, can we apply this research? I'm not quite sure if we could, but this is how you find things out. You go off and give it a try. Now we didn't get quite as far as we wanted to in this research. We began doing it round about March 2019. Something else began in March 2019, so that kind of had a bit of an impact on us, but we're trying to kind of find ways around it, trying to kind of look at alternatives. And it's often the case, actually, kind of the workarounds we found actually end up giving us some quite interesting insights. I'll give you a little example of some eye tracking data. Hopefully this will work. That's what happens when you try and play a video. So, not sure it's going. Oh, hang on, something's happening. Okay, so this is a novice viewing a phishing website. So you'll see the little dots moving around. This is an example of where eyes are. So if I press the start button, what? Okay, here we go. So you can see, if I can just look at the main bit of the page, we start kind of darting around. You can see if there's anything we're not looking at that we really should be looking at. You see, I've still not looked at the URL, have we? Still not looked at the actual web address. Oh, we were close that time. So actually, the 110th eye movement is when we actually look at the web address. And we keep on going for a while, scanning the page. And then that one single eye movement, there was no way we consciously processed that web address. So even though it's almost more, I think, by chance, we've happened to kind of flicker onto that information. But we haven't looked at it. This is an expert viewing of the same thing. As you can see, we go straight to the web address. That's the main thing we're interested in. We don't really care that much about the other stuff. Everything else can be spoofed or faked, all kind of images. We're much more focused, much more kind of engaged. So it's interesting seeing how people look at these things. And it's also interesting to think, can you try to train that? Can you try to change people's eye movements? And it gives you a kind of a nice subjective measure. Because that's the problem. If you ask someone in a study, or you ask an employee in a company, do you look at a web address? They'll say, yes, of course I do, because we don't be fired. So asking people is not always very reliable. That kind of thing gives you nice kind of objective data. So we decided to try and do some research on this ourselves. This is myself and my colleague, Professor Peter Howells. Peter is a proper cognitive psychologist, so if you have any hard questions about the eye tracking research, please ask him rather than me. But we decided to look at kind of trying to create some kind of lab-based phishing emails, trying to figure out, okay, what's the anatomy of a phishing email. We kind of looked around various sites, looked at the National Crime Agency, and I'm sure websites of other organisations in the room. At the time, urgency, misspelling, financial information, or kind of threatening language, these are often kind of listed as things which kind of indicate in some way that something might be a phishing email. I have to say, this research was also partly inspired. I remember at the time at Bournemouth University, we got an email round saying, it's time for the mandatory fire safety training, please click on this link and go and do the training. This email was written in a way that did not look very convincing. And so our fire marshal was getting angrier and angrier because no one was doing the fire training because we all thought it was a phishing email. So it kind of gave that example of how people having to make very quick decisions about having to distinguish between what's real and what's fake. So we did that. This is the kind of data we got. So when you see a blob of colour, it means that there's some kind of eye movement that's taking place. I think what's interesting is that the amount of text that isn't read. So again, when you read something, you probably feel quite convinced you've read every single word. You probably haven't. You've kind of skimmed it. You've read bits of words. This was based on kind of standard phishing email you might get saying, oh, your order's on the way, and mention money, kind of try to get people to click on it in some way. One of the things that's difficult with this kind of research is trying to have a kind of control group, because you're trying to kind of create a fake email which looks like a real email, and you're also trying to create fake emails which look like fake emails, because you can't use an actual phishing email that people can actually click on, because that'd be very, very dangerous. And so one of the things I'm going to be appealing to you for later on is if we can find ways to use kind of real world examples. But that's the kind of thing that people saw. This one, you'll not be able to see it from where you are, but we had a really obvious spelling mistake. So we had PayPal with an E between the Y and the P, so PayPal. And as you can see, people did tend to see that. People tend to pick up on it, which was reassuring. Before we got to this point, we did do some kind of pilot, or a pilot of the pilot study. We did kind of a calibration thing. We got cybersecurity PhD students in, and we had kind of less obvious spelling mistakes, and we were just curious, are we going to actually see these? And out of the 12 of them, only one of them did. Only one of them noticed the fact that there was a spelling mistake in this email. And we were just curious. I was asking the student after, like, do you have any idea? Because you're the only person that seems to have seen this. And it goes back to the talk earlier on about accessibility. Her belief was, because she's dyslexic, she really has to focus and try and reading every single word. And that's really interesting. It's really interesting that she's not being fooled the same way that other people were. So yeah, we found again some kind of indicators which were interesting. We did get some confusing results though, and confusing results are good in some ways, but are also a bit annoying sometimes. So phishing elements were looked at more frequently than you'd expect by chance alone. Fair enough, that makes sense. That's what we're kind of expecting to see. But overall, people spent less time looking at these kind of indicators of risk than they should have done by chance. Now this is like, if you get to the end of the day and you're all leaving and you're walking across the square downstairs, it would be like if a lion walked past you and you went, oh, a lion, and just kept on walking. Like if you didn't react to the presence of this thing. It was kind of strange. And we thought maybe people are so kind of confident in their ability that they know what a phishing email is, that the minute we see something, they think, okay, it's phishing then, I don't have to kind of look at it again. Well, yeah, that's really weird. People don't tend to look at risks less than other things. They tend to look at it a lot more. It might be the fact that people have become very ingrained to read emails very quickly. So even though we kind of know on some level we should be looking more carefully, we just tend to move on and not really kind of pay too much attention. Not every phishing email was identified as such, so people in general were reasonably good, but we weren't perfect. It wasn't fantastic. Financial elements were looked at least, which is interesting. Lots of phishing emails have some kind of money mentioned in them, but they didn't seem to be particularly something that got people's attention. Threatening and urgent language was more attractive. It caught people's attention quicker than misspellings, which we were surprised about. We thought misspellings was a really kind of categorical, obvious thing, but people were not overall that fussed about it. Overall, there was a main effect in which phishing elements were rated as being less trustworthy. Sorry, emails with phishing emails were seen to be less trustworthy, which, okay, makes sense for kind of what we can want to see. But there was no correlation between how much time spent looking at those things and how trustworthy we thought it was. So it kind of suggests there's something a bit more complex going on, something a bit more deeper, and we've not quite got a sense of yet. And this is one of the things we are continuing to do research on. In the meantime, and partly, as I said, inspired by some of the challenges around COVID, we looked at some other things. So one of the examples was, I keep doing that. One of the examples we've been looking at is gambling websites. And it's really similar. Social engineering and marketing are the same thing. You're trying to influence someone to do a certain behaviour. And it's funny, I think social engineering is often seen as being a kind of a separate topic in some ways from social psychology and marketing and everything else. It really isn't. It's the same thing. It's the same basic goal. So we need some work around gambling sites, especially around safer gambling messages. Now, you'll be shocked to learn that safer gambling messages on gambling company websites are often quite hidden. They're kind of down the bottom of a web page. They're not easy to see. And I think a lot of the time when you do eye tracking research, you do feel like you're stating the obvious, but you're doing so in a way which is quantified and kind of proven. And you can then go to a company and say, no, it doesn't matter if you tell us that your customers say that the messages are okay. We can show you that only 4% of them actually look at this thing. But it's been useful doing that. We've also been looking at fake news. I say we in the Royal Centre. It's actually Amanda, who's one of our PhD students. He's looking very embarrassed. Amanda, who's funded by the US Army, looking at fake news. One of the findings from that was that culture didn't seem to have much of an impact on people's kind of paying attention to these things, which does kind of suggest, as we would kind of hope, that these kind of cognitive processes are something which are very fundamental and universal. So obviously culture does matter in terms of changing behaviour, but there's a kind of a base level that might be something that we can use for trying to challenge these kind of situations. We were having a chat with Cheryl, one of our PhD students. I swear to God, I didn't make him come along. We wanted to be here. It'll be fun. It's good for you. Yeah, well, yes. So I was thinking Cheryl during the break, I don't know how we'll do it, but if you get like hackers like wear an eye tracker. I was saying that, I mean, we've done research with hackers before. I know we say we're kind of anarchists, we're against society, we don't care about humanity or research or helping scientists. It's nonsense. We love attention. We love being spoken to. We probably actually could persuade a hacker to wear an eye tracker doing something and just see what do we look at, how do we make those decisions, what do we focus on. So lots of potential, especially since things have become a bit more accessible now. So traditionally, eye tracker was a lovely thing. It looked like a clamp. You bring the volunteer in. And I say volunteer, I mean student. You just grab on them, bring them in, sit them down, put them in the head clamp. And people are very limited in what we could do, obviously, because you can't really move that much. You're kind of well stuck there. Because pandemic, we couldn't do that anymore, which led us to then think about other opportunities. You do also get ones which are a bit less scary. So this is more of a kind of a free. Well, it's not really virtual reality. It's free screens, but it's less invasive. The equipment's not quite as scary. Oh, sorry, one ahead there. This is the one we use for most of our research. It's called an SMI Red. So the little bar down the bottom. That's the eye tracker. So it shines infrared light into people's eyes. It works out what we're looking at. As I say, less threatening than some of the alternatives. People need to sit quite still. They can't really move their head. If they're wearing glasses, it doesn't always quite work very well. So it's better, but it's still quite limited. You can also get mobile eye trackers. So these are basically look like Google Glass. People wear these, and they can walk around, and you can see what we're looking at. You can try to figure out, what we're kind of paying attention to. I do also know, I think fairly recently, there's also been some VR headsets which incorporate eye tracking. And that's really interesting, because obviously if you're using a mobile eye tracker, you're kind of limited by the real world. You're limited in terms of things like experimental manipulation. If you're doing it in virtual reality, you can create the scene, you can do whatever you want. So there's quite a lot of possibilities there, which is really, really exciting. And so this is work that we've been doing. Still, though, you do get limitations of all this equipment. And what we've, for years, thought would be really lovely would be if we could have an eye tracking people can just use anywhere. And in the last few years, this has come to be the case. So there is software now people can use, which will use your webcam of your laptop or your PC or your smartphone, and can use eye tracking. It's not as precise, it's not as accurate as the kind of fancy head clamp equipment, but it can be useful and it might have some quite interesting possibilities. Here's a nice flashing picture of myself testing out this software. I've got a hoodie on because I'm going to get into the hacker mindset. Also, the heating's really expensive these days. So as you can see, it's tracking my eyes, even if I've glasses on, it's still tracking where my eyes are. And yeah, it's quite a lot of potential because yeah, you're not bringing someone into a lab. You aren't walking around wearing a pair of quite obvious headset which has cameras on it. You aren't creating that kind of artificial environment. You could potentially do it in a very ecologically valid way. Now, there's lots of questions about this, lots of ethical questions. If you are a company, you don't have to tell your employees you're doing this. You might decide just to track your eye movements when they're working away. You might be seeing who's clicking on phishing emails, who's not reading a URL when they go to a website, so you could potentially do that. As well as kind of eye movements, these eye tracking can also look at things like pupil dilation, which gives you a measure of people's tiredness or stress levels. So you get lots of debates. I mean, you could say if it's, I don't know, some kind of call centre, should they really be tracking their employees' eye movements? Is that about unethical if you then fire someone because they're a bit tired? On the other hand, if it's an air traffic control system, maybe it's okay then to be watching people's eye movements and checking we're not missing something. So there's lots of debates around it. I say lots of applications, and this is where we're kind of interested in taking the research. So things like for social engineering, what I would love to do, and we have another PhD student who's actually not here today because she got COVID, but she really wanted to be here. She might be online. So one of our students, Jazz, is looking at the psychological characteristics and life experience of ethical social engineers. If anyone knows any, please come and speak to me because she's looking to do interviews. What we'd love to do, if we can persuade one of them to do it, is put mobile eye tracker on a social engineer and let them go and do somewhere. Let them get their way into a company and just see what do they look at. How do they make the decision how to approach that challenge? And of course, again, if you ask them, they can tell you, they can tell you to a degree what they do. There's always going to be kind of unconscious hidden things that they're thinking when they're doing this process. And the eye tracking might be able to reveal some of that. We can also use it for training and prevention. So I very deliberately, I Googled cybersecurity training. I did not use an image of any real cybersecurity training companies because it could have been awkward. But what if you're doing cybersecurity training, what if no one's really paying attention? Now, as a university lecturer, I'm very accustomed to the audience kind of drifting off and zoning out. But what if that's happening in cybersecurity training? If again, eye tracker, mobile eye tracker, potentially even depending on quality of a camera in the room, you can do that. You can do your cybersecurity training to your employees in the room, and you can see, okay, slide 5, they all stopped caring, and you can go back and try and change it. You can try to figure out, okay, why is that happening? You could also potentially use it in a more, I suppose, kind of proactive way. So this is a real phishing email I received a couple of years ago. I love it. It's got my name on it. It seems to have worked out a connection to Glasgow. And if you listen very carefully, I've got a hint of an accent. I do come from Glasgow. It's able to work out these things about me. It sent me this phishing email. Now, say I'm in a job. Well, I am in a job. I'm stressed, and I'm often stressed. And I'm receiving lots of emails. It might be I go to click on something in a phishing email. But what if my webcam on my PC or my laptop, what if it's detected I'm about to click on something and I haven't looked at it properly? Maybe it blocks me in some way. You can't receive it. There was a colour change there. It blocks me in some way. It says, no, you can't click on this until you look at it. Until you read the actual address, you cannot do this. Again, that kind of creates issues around how to do that. It creates user acceptance issues. Would employees, for example, really want their eye movements being tracked all the time? I mean, during pandemic, people are working from home. There are some companies that are monitoring people's kind of PC use that cause lots of controversy. But maybe there's a halfway ground. Maybe there's some way of doing that. And people can learn. People can learn to change where we focus their attention. So some of the work I do around gambling, people who are recovering from a gambling problem, they can train themselves not to see gambling shops in the high street, because most high streets these days, there are gambling shops everywhere. And just going to buy a pint of milk with someone who's had a gambling problem is really difficult. But they can train themselves not to see these things. So you could do the same kind of thing in the kind of reverse. You can train people, even perhaps mostly unconsciously, to see things, look at the URL before they click on something, and just to check these things. So there's no kind of clear solutions, but possibilities. We are very open to collaboration. Academics, we have equipment, we've got all the kind of nice toys, we know how to analyse the data. Our biggest challenge as people is getting real-world actual data. So we're very happy to collaborate with any businesses or agencies who are interested in doing this kind of work, just to fully convince you to come to Bournemouth to collaborate. We do have a very nice beach. It's very lovely. And we're only about an hour and 50 minutes away from London on the train. You don't have to change, it's a direct line. But yes, we're always very happy to talk to you. And of course, you're welcome to get in touch with me either through email or through the Twitter account there. Thank you.
I was going to ask John what the cost of the a peak train from London to Bournemouth is, but I decided not to go down that route. Any questions? Any questions? Or shall I kick us off? So, I have a few. So, you're presenting sort of a number of reasons why people, or what you found in the context of where people have noticed certain bits of phishing messaging. The question I have is, are there any cognitive biases that you think could be used to explain some of people's behavior? Any things that stood out in particular of, okay, this is where people focused, actually this might be explained in this using by this bias or this theory or anything similar to that?
Yeah, there's a few. So confirmation bias is a big one. So if a phishing email has your bank logo, you just tend to believe it's true. We also get things like the availability heuristic. So that's how likely you think something is to happen is based on how easily you can visualize it. So people like myself are often scared of flying because it's really easy to visualize a plane crash. You see it on the news. People struggle to visualize a cybersecurity attack. People know what it kind of looks like. And so because of that, it kind of works in the reverse. If you think it's less likely to happen, they think an email is more likely to be true because they can't really picture what it means if it's a fake one. And it's interesting actually with language. So biases, cognitive biases and cognitive heuristics are the same thing. It's a mental shortcut. It's just that when we use one of them and it works out for the best, we call it a heuristic. When it goes wrong, we call it a cognitive bias, but they are the same thing.
Yep. And any more? Yeah, we have one from online. Miles?
We actually have three.
We have three from online.
I need two now, and then I'll let it go to...
Are they all from Bournemouth? Or?
No, everyone's here already.
Right. A quick one from Philip, which is there a white paper we can download on your findings?
No. But there's a Frontiers paper. So the paper I mentioned on one of the slides, that's open access, people can access.
Brilliant. Nadine asks, says, first of all, fascinating presentation. It's always good to relay that. You showed the difference between an expert and a novice. What other factors could influence eye tracking results?
So you do get a lot of kind of methodological artifact things, so things like wearing glasses, how happy you are with your screen, which makes it difficult. Often it does seem the amount of time someone has to do it. It depends how important they think it is to actually do it properly. And this is why doing it experimentally is a challenge, because although participants might take it seriously, it's still not the same as them being in the actual workplace and generally having to read emails. And this is why, if you can get collaborators, it'd be really, really interesting. It might give us a kind of better sense of that. It's all a fairly emergent area, and lots of things like tiredness, stress, lots of other things can have an impact as well. So it's difficult trying to untangle what exactly is causing that behaviour.
Okay, the one in the room.
Thank you. Hello, another Bournemouth alum here.
Oh, excellent.
Sorry, we're everywhere. I'm just really interested when you talk about the difference between the novice and the expert. The expert has had to learn to look at the URL because actually the UX of that page says don't look at this, and the graphic design of that page says don't look at this. So I wondered if you'd looked at any work on how you might change elements of the UX to shift how and where people look on the page.
Not really, no. It's something I think we'd like to do. It'll be really, really interesting. I do know we have a smaller work. One of my colleagues has done work with senior crime officers. So very experienced senior crime officers will walk into scene, they'll look at things very quickly, but we struggle to explain to a new person what we do exactly. So what some people have done is show the kind of novice crime scene investigator the eye tracking video of the expert crime scene investigator, just so they can learn how to kind of adapt those strategies. But you're right. I mean, it'd be interesting to kind of try moving things around and see what the impact is.
I'm just curious to know the research that was done. did you know the endpoints that people were using? Was it laptops, desktops, or mobile devices? And is there a difference?
We did. So the kind of phishing email one, that was entirely lab-based. For our gambling study, it was a mixture of laptop and desktop. For the fake news study, Amanda, was it all laptops, desktop? I'm thinking you didn't do any mobile. No. So you can do mobile, but we didn't go quite that far. Although it didn't seem between laptop and desktop, there wasn't any kind of difference in terms of results.
I think we're probably more interested in mobile devices because the screen sizes are different, as we know.
It would be interesting.
You see a different view to you do on your emails than on a desktop or laptop.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be really interesting. Yeah. Hello, Cheryl. This is one of the PhD students.
So first of all, I'll meet you afterwards so you can pay me a lot of money, yeah? My second question is, looking at sort of the eye tracking with regards to sort of novice and expert, etc., did you also consider the age of your participants? Because considering my personal experiences versus perhaps my nephew's experiences versus perhaps my mum's experiences with phishing emails, they're going to be hugely different. There's a massive disparity between them, especially because a lot of the youngsters do believe, because of YouTube and things, they see these kids winning all these prizes and doing all this stuff. They'll think, and they don't think to look at these big glaring spelling mistakes, etc. So is that something that you perhaps considered or potentially would consider in the future at looking at?
So our sample, because it was a student sample, we were quite a narrow age range. I do know from a literature review, it's really interesting, about half the research says younger adults are at high risk of phishing emails, and about half the research says older adults. It's really inconsistent and really contradictory. And one of the things I mentioned today is personality. I think it'd be interesting to look at personality type and see if that's maybe some kind of moderator or mediator between that relationship.
As long as it's not the MBTI, because we all know how that's going out
We're not doing the MBTI.
We go back online, maybe for one more?
Yep. This is from another Nadine who asks in regards to when reviewing like how people process emails. They say, do you think that the fact that people are desensitized to polished sales emails has an impact on whether people pay attention to things like spelling mistakes? And what impact do you think this would have on recognizing spelling mistakes? And as an example, they said, I once received some training from a sales guy that claimed adding spelling mistakes doubled the chances of getting a response.
I suppose it can make you look more human, maybe. I think it's a huge thing. I think we are so accustomed to emails now. We have such kind of firm expectations. As well as a fire marshal example, I think it was Croydon Council had a thing, we sent out an email about council tax, people had to fill in, no one did. They finally realised because the email had said it was written in Comic Sans, and people just thought, that's a phishing email. So as people have so many preconceptions, I think it makes it difficult then trying to work out, are we not thinking of it as being a risk because they don't realise it's a phishing email, or do we just kind of ignore it because it's such part of our kind of everyday life now? Thank you.